Welcome back. This is the 24th segment of our series, Because It's True, making the case for Christianity in bite-sized pieces. Now, as we work through our apologetic model, which has three prongs to it, the philosophical, the historical, and the experiential, we want to begin to address the trustworthiness historically of the scriptures. And perhaps this is the best time to begin to address probably the most frequent accusation made against the trustworthiness of the Bible, and that is that it is full of contradictions. This is not a new accusation by any means. I'm aware of a book that was published in 1860 called The Self-Contradictions of the Bible. There was a response to that, published in 1874, entitled Alleged Discrepancies of the Bible. Now, when you are confronted with this accusation, the first question, of course, that you want to ask is, what contradictions are you thinking about? Can you give me one, or two, or 10, if somebody claims that it's full of contradictions? A number of weeks ago, in an exchange over Facebook, a gentleman asserted to me that the Bible is contradiction in pure form. To which I replied, I would love to see some documentation for that. And I've yet to hear from him. However, you may get some response. Now, if you do, we need to keep some things in mind. First of all, variation is not a contradiction. Differences do not make up a contradiction. A contradiction is when you have two sentences that are pulling in opposite directions. Let me give you an example of two contradictory sentences. The Bible is full of contradictions. The Bible is not full of contradictions. See, these are contradictory statements just logically because one affirms and the other denies. And they can never both be true. So, a genuine contradiction, as opposed to a difference, is that a contradiction cannot be reconciled, whereas a difference or a variable can be reconciled. We're all aware of the fact that when a crime is committed, you may have 2 or 3 or 4 witnesses, and their account will vary because they have seen the crime from different perspectives. And investigators love it when they can get as many witnesses to a crime as possible because the variety of perspectives helps give them a fuller picture of what took place. And historians are the same way when it comes to events for which they are attempting to get as full a picture as possible. Thus, this is why it's marvelous that we have 4 accounts, 4 gospel accounts of the life of Jesus. So, one of the things to keep in mind about the Gospels and historical accounts in the Bible are variations. And let me give you a prime example because this is an example that a number of people use. If you look in Matthew and if you look in Mark at the accounts of the resurrection, they will both make reference to one angel being there at the empty tomb. If you read Luke's account, he's going to reference two angels at the grave. Now, this is a variation. It is not a contradiction. If there were two, there was certainly one. The word that would be absolutely essential in order for this to be a contradiction in either the Matthew or the Mark accounts would be the word only. There was only one angel. Variations, differences are not contradictions. Another thing to keep in mind is context. Another frequent example of a contradiction in scriptures comes from the book of Proverbs. Because if you read in Proverbs 26, verse 4, it'll say, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself." And then the very next verse, Proverbs 26, 5, says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will see himself as wise." Now, some folks say that is a contradiction. Keep a couple things in mind. First of all, you have to then assume that the writer of Proverbs was so stupid he was unaware that he was writing two contradictory statements, one right after the other. No, it's an issue of context. And the context is that the book of Proverbs is a book of sayings that work as rules of thumb, if you will, principles. And these are two completely different but very related principles. You're dealing with someone who is foolish. On the one hand, you may decide it's best not to answer him according to his folly. Otherwise, you're going to sink down to his level with his name-calling and his slander and his foolishness. Or you may decide that you need to answer him in the same way that he is talking in order to mirror for him the foolishness that he is attempting to throw off on you, and perhaps he will recognize that and go, "Oh, okay, I'm not so smart after all." And then finally, to keep in mind, description is different from approval. In a number of cases, and you will see where people of God do really corrupt things. And some people want to assume that because there's not an immediate condemnation of that God must approve. Whereas in other places, he has condemned it. Well, two things to keep in mind. This is an argument that is especially prevalent concerning Old Testament characters with polygamy. People who have been blessed by God, and yet people like David and Solomon had more than one wife. And it's not immediately condemned. And yet the broader context is that it has been condemned prior to their rebellion and disobedience, which is then described in the Bible, even though it's not immediately condemned. Description does not mean approval. And silence on something that has already been condemned is by no means a contradiction.